Tonight we have a wonderful admissions panel here, and they're going to be addressing everything related to the college admissions process, giving pointers, tips, and information that will be helpful to guide students through the 23 to 24 application cycle. So our panelists are all from different institutions, and that will really bring a lot of perspective into this process for you all. So I'm going to turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves. So if we want to start here.
Hello, everyone. Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah. Absolutely, yes. Thank you for raising it up. My name is Birgit Monzier. I am an assistant director in the Office of Admissions at Brookdale Community College. I'm very happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Greg Moyer, and I am the Associate Vice President for Enrollment at Dickinson College, which is exactly 2 hours and 58 minutes due west of here. I just did it. Thanks so much for having us here tonight. Really appreciate it.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Butler. I'm the Special Assistant to the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Danielle Toglia. I'm the Regional Admission and Recruitment Manager at San Diego State University in beautiful San Diego, California. Thanks for having me.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name is Brian Sate. I'm the Assistant Director of Transfers at the College of New Jersey, in Ewing, New Jersey.
All right, so we do have some questions that I will be asking our panelists tonight, but we will have some time towards the end to take questions from the audience. So, keep things in mind, and you'll have the opportunity to get information from them at the end, specific to any areas that you wanted to cover. So, whoever wants to start off, I'm going to ask our first question. What are some factors that a student should consider to determine what college or university is a good fit for them?
Okay, I'll go. Coming from a community college, the best thing I can say, the biggest factor you should consider is yourself. Who are you? What kind of student you are? How do you study? What motivates you? What environment stimulates you? These are really the things that will make you successful wherever you go. So the answer starts with you yourself. We're all different types of students, different types of learners. Some people like big environments, some people like small environments, more personalized services and attention. So basically you need to examine yourself.
I would say that this is sort of a segmented journey. I usually tell families to sort of incorporate college visits when you do family trips and things like that. But you all are very lucky to live in a place that has such a rich combination of different kinds of colleges. So it's easy for you to get sort of a taste of, do I want urban, or do I want suburban? Do I want a research university, or do I want, a small liberal arts college? I usually tell students, especially juniors, to frame your college search with not necessarily what you want to be when you grow up or what you want to major in, but what problem in the world you want to solve, right? Because that will help you sort of frame where you want to be. If you want to solve like a big international problem, being at a big university in a major city is going to be a great choice for you. If you want to, talk about, English literature maybe and pursue a life of academia, then a small liberal arts college might be perfect for you. So frame that college search about not necessarily what you want to be 10 years from now, but what problems in the world that you want to solve.
I think that's a perfect combination, right? Self-reflection and the thought about who you are as an individual and what you want to move toward, I think is a great combination. But I think starting the process is also very overwhelming, right, and difficult when we're thinking about how many colleges and universities are out there and what the starting point is and where the ending point will be, right? That's the application process. And so narrowing down our choices from the thousands of schools that exist here, right, in this country alone, and then moving toward an application list, I think can be daunting. So take your time, right? I think vacation is a great time, right, to get to campuses because there's less pressure. And sometimes we find those diamonds in the rough, right, when we're just traveling with our family to certain locations and we can get out of the car and walk around and get a good feel. But I think my number one sort of piece of advice for that process would be, don't start with the names of colleges, right? I think that's a no-no in my book, because you will necessarily, not on purpose, but I think in some cases you will miss those diamonds in the rough, right? If you're rather thinking, just logically about things, I'm going on vacation, I'm traveling to a geographic area, my cousin's graduating from X, Y, or Z, and you're on that college campus, if you can walk around and do a visit and get to know it, maybe that will help you to discover what are your likes, right? Sometimes we're not sure. Self-reflection is a wonderful thing, but if we're not sure because we haven't been on any other campuses other than perhaps the ones that are nearby or the ones where we've had an event for, we might not know our likes and our dislikes yet. And the nice thing about having things that are close by is that you can do that, right? You can visit research universities, small liberal arts, big places, urban places, all within an hour roughly of where we are, right, in Monmouth County. So nothing replaces a visit, right? The visit is your opportunity to get to know the campus, but I always think of the visit not this, right? This is not what I think of, this is what I think of. You know, when you step onto the campus and you physically see it, you'll understand perhaps, right, where your lean is in terms of the things that you enjoy. Seeing people interacting with folks that are like you, I hope being challenged by folks that are not like you. You know, those are the things we want you to discover as you move to the campus and to the visit. So sometimes getting on the campus is a really great way to start the process, even though that doesn't seem logical, right? It seems logical that you would narrow down choices first, but it's a great way for you to narrow down your choices to discover if small or large or research or liberal arts, close to home or far away, are really good fits for you. So I say visit, visit, visit. You can do those things formally and informally. So right now, most of us have students that have graduated. We're getting ready to move into the summer, but there's usually a lag time when there's no tours on campus, which is usually now. That's okay, right? If you're driving through somewhere, get onto the campus, do a self-guided tour, take a look around. That, I think, is a great way for you to start to narrow down your choices.
I mean, going off that, that's how I kind of found where I went to school. I just put in a 30 or a 3-hour radius from my hometown and kind of found schools within that time, within that duration of time that had programs that I wanted to do, extracurriculars that I wanted to be a part of. So kind of going off of that, that's kind of what, I didn't look at the names, I just went, here's a radius that my parents are like, 3 hours sounds good from here. Don't go further than that. And my brothers went way further than that. So that's what you get for being the firstborn. But even with that, even if you can't make it to a campus, first and foremost, to start looking at those schools, you can start, I always kind of reference, this is like the golden time to go to school and look at the schools that you want to go to. Because everybody now has a virtual kind of component. So whether it's a virtual campus tour or a virtual information session, to kind of start getting your appetite together on what schools you're looking at, that could be the beneficial part. Like you could go home tonight and do a campus tour of the University of Hawaii if you really wanted to. But also keeping in mind that duration of time of where you want to go. Keeping in mind with cost to fly back home or go out there. I kind of use the anecdote of my little brother wanted to go to school at the University of Central Florida. I'm from Monmouth County. My little brother wanted to go to Central Florida for no reason, just, oh, Central Florida, that sounds nice. Had no interest in the school, really didn't know what he wanted to do, just liked the school. And we get on the plane to go visit the school, and he looks at me and he goes, I don't like flying. And I go, oh, that's great, because you have to fly to go to this school. So thought process to keep those kind of components in track too. Like if you don't like flying, maybe flying to your school is not the great option. No offense, because it's a great school. So if you fly to San Diego, yeah, I mean you can make it a trip too. But keeping those kind of thoughts in mind. The fall semester, there's a lot of time that you're going to be coming home and going back and coming home and going back. So keeping those thoughts in mind too. But also like finding out when you're on campus, what does the extracurricular involvement feel like? Are students happy to be there? Talk to a student that's not a part of the tour, not an ambassador or giving the tour. Speak to a random student. I'm sure they would either love to talk to you or not really, and keep it moving. So that might give you a solid indicator of maybe I'm not meant to be at this school if the students aren't totally friendly. So just keeping that in mind, not that it would happen at TC&J, but just kind of keeping those little thoughts and components together as you start that process of finding virtual events first and then kind of continuing to move out. Not everybody has the luxury to go and travel across and find schools, and that's why my kind of limitation was a 3-hour radius. And I pushed that boundary as far as I could. But keeping those thought problems, we didn't have the virtual events. The website that I found my alma mater on isn't even existing anymore. So you have a lot more in front of you than you actually think.
Okay, thank you guys. You guys brought up a lot of really good points that students could consider when researching colleges, like those things like location and size and programs. Brian, I know you just mentioned like research tools, right? So would you guys recommend any specific tools or methods to use when researching these things?
I guess I could start. I know, because I've been trying to stay hip. Yeah, I'm true. I'm pretty good. I don't have Instagram, but I have TikTok, so I guess that says something about me. So like, I'm following more and more of schools across the country and what they're doing on TikTok, and I find students who are going to those schools or interacting on social media platforms is a good way to see what's going on campus for everything good, bad, the ugly, and the beautiful, all on social media out there. It could really give you an idea of what you're looking at. If students are complaining about certain issues on campus, and that's something important to you, then maybe either one, you take the social media post as it is, or B, it's social media and take it with a grain of salt and I'll check it out for myself. So like, that's a good way that I think now in today's world is probably a good idea, in kind of checking in and not using, and what I mean by that, like not using our branded Instagram or TikTok pages or stuff like that, because obviously we're going to show you our big beautiful campus and like, oh, this student's graduating with all these kind of things and showing you all the beautiful things. But if we're going to be honest, find students who are involved in the campus or search the hashtag or something along those lines to see what other students are saying or what's happening around campus. I think that's a good, valuable piece. The other thing, this might change things. Because when I was looking at school, I was a first-gen student. I didn't know what I didn't know the difference between a research institution or a liberal arts institution. I was just looking for programs that had, where I could play with television equipment and I could play football. And that's what I wanted to do. And that was kind of my search. And I was asking people in the know, school counselors, football coaches, my TV production teachers, stuff like that, to kind of figure out, well, what schools do you kind of think of? Because my parents didn't really have any input. And, at that point, Googling and Ask Jeeves wasn't the biggest thing. So, I really had to use a lot of word of mouth. I think that's completely changed. We're all up here to answer all of your questions, calling us, asking us questions, because by nature, we are all counselors at heart. Yes, we would love you all to attend our institutions, but we want to make sure that you're going to an institution that fits you academically, socially, emotionally, and financially. So we are here to help you through that process. So calling us, speaking to your school counselor, speaking to teachers, coaches, your support system, looking on websites, social media, I think those are all great resources. And if anyone has anything else, I'll jump off my soapbox.
I think the social media is a really good ad. We see a lot of students coming to Dickinson for the first time or through their search through mediums that are really accessible to them, right? Like, this makes sense. This is a language I speak, and I want to see a student experience through the student eyes. And so that makes a lot of sense. I think you heard from Danielle suggesting, too, that probably college names, or, you could probably extrapolate, maybe rankings aren't the best place to start with your search process as well, that they perhaps can serve as a guide at some point throughout your search, but determining your entire list with somebody else's opinion is perhaps not the best way to, at least initially, approach your search. I tell families all the time, Dickinson's going to cost over $80,000 a year next year. This is a really big investment that families will make in an education. And so doing the research well is incumbent upon you, right, as you think about this intense investment you'll make. I've told families in the past to read colleges' bond ratings. No one has ever done that. I guarantee you that they probably never will. I think it's a good suggestion, right? Because it's somebody else, an outside agency, that says, like, this is the strength, right? This is the health of the institution, and this is what we think it'll look like, not just now, but 5 years from now. U.S. News and World Report certainly serves a role in the process, but their job is not to help you get into college, right? It's not a public service. Their job is to sell ads and make money, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just they're just not trying to help you per se. So getting past some of that noise and turning to some other places that might actually look to serve you in the process. I don't think families spend a lot of time reading strategic plans and things like that, but you could, right? That if you get really serious about a college, trying to unpack what it is that they value and where they see themselves. The last thing that I tell families sometimes when they're not, all the traditional methods make sense, but when they're trying to do something a bit atypical, I also tell them to follow the money. And by that I mean, Dickinson's a small college of about 2,400 students. A few years ago, we built a new science center that cost the college about $115 million. Now, you didn't come to every single information session at Dickinson and have us tell you, we're interested in the sciences, we hope you are too, right? But you could certainly infer that we opened the doors to this brand new center and that our job the following year was to fill it with scientists, right? And so you got a sense for the college's mission and where we were headed by following the money, right? Getting a sense for what we were building, where we were investing, what we were valuing, and you could get a sense for, are those things you value? So those are maybe 3 things that aren't niche and Naviance and all good tools, but are a bit different as well.
I think I'm just going to add to that because you are a resource of your own. So what I would do, which is what I did with my own kids, is I created a spreadsheet. So once you've narrowed down some of those choices, create a spreadsheet with the pros and the cons and the costs and everything that's important to you. Because as you go through, after you visit, 1 to 3 colleges, everything is going to start to mull together. You're not going to remember what it was or what you liked. And so pick out those high list items that are important to you, create a spreadsheet, and then keep a rating of it. So then you'll be able to refer back to that spreadsheet and not make just emotional decisions as to what you see or what you feel at that particular time. It just keeps you present and accountable.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so, after researching and narrowing down, the list, students are obviously going to start filling out their application. So I think the big question is, what are college admissions counselors really looking for in these applications?
So I hate for this to be a non-answer, but I think that what each university is looking for is that the student applied to that school with intention, right? That they are, like for example, GW is an urban research university and we have a lot of sort of international presence in our international school. We want doers. Our students are doing internships, those sorts of things. So I want to see that that's reflected in the students' supplemental essay. That's reflected in their sort of list of activities, right? The Common App is sort of done away with sort of an intentional resume, right? You write different resumes for different jobs you're applying to, right? So you've just got the Common App. But the way to really say, hey, GW, I see you and I see a fit for me and you is through that supplemental essay. So I see the Common App like Greg does, like Brian does, like all of us do, right? But what I want to see is that special love letter to my institution saying, I've done my homework, and I know what your mission is, I know what your values are, I know what you provide for your students, and you will serve me very well. And I think that's what I look for as a reader, that applicants have applied to GW with intention.
I know in a moment we might talk about the idea of demonstrated fit. And I think, but just to dovetail off of what Chris said for a second, is that we've started talking about that, because Dickinson is one of the institutions that does track demonstrated interest, and we can talk about that now or in a second. But we find ourselves talking about it in terms of demonstrated understanding. And that's exactly what Chris is talking about, that we do want to see students do this process well, employ a system that works for them, right? Follow it through the process, research, match really well, and then reflect that back to us on our applications. And some of that, at least for schools that track it, is this demonstrated interest, this demonstrated understanding. Have you done your research? Have you shown up virtually? Have you reached out for an interview? Are you showing us that you are interested in addition to doing the search well at all these other places? So it is kind of a tall ask, right? But those are things that we look for, especially a small college. Last year we had 9,000 applications. We looked for 550 spots. That's like landing the plane on the tip of its wing. That's really hard. And so for us, demonstrated understanding or demonstrated interest plays a really key role in landing that exactly where we need to at 550 spots, because it's not just about who can do the work, it's who's going to show up in the fall. And that's really important to us as well, too. So we look for that.
You know, we always joke that in this right admission world that our answer to everything is it depends, right? But it really does, it depends. Having worked for previous institutions to my current, which is much larger than all three previous combined, we're not generally looking at demonstrated interest because of our size. But I think that in terms of demonstrated interest, right, you should be doing the demonstrated interest component because that's your search process, right? That's your fit. That's finding your fit to us, if it's a good fit for you, right? Large public research, far away. You necessarily get on the plane, but I would suggest it. But those are the things that you have to think about, right, when you're looking at demonstrated interest, regardless of the fact that if we check a box and that would have some kind of an indication as to whether we would choose you, we want you to choose us, right? So that's, I think, part of the sort of process and leading to an application. My rule of thumb is you should not be applying to any institution where you don't find the fit. So for parents in the room who would suggest otherwise, I would just ask, right, we increase those numbers by over application, right? So thinking about applications that are appropriate is really important because there should be no reason to apply to any other institution that's not a good fit, even financially. There's plenty of other places, right, to apply to financially that you could think about a wealthy financial aid package that for other reasons might not be necessarily in-state or close to home, et cetera. So I just always ask that ethically, that you think about that list and how it grows and how it has an influence, right, later. But I think in terms of the application, it's like the dating game, right? You want to provide us with enough information so that we get to know you, right, as we move through the application before perhaps you're admitted to the institution, right, and you obviously decide to attend and accept our proposal. So it's really, I think for some reason, students think they need to rush to the application. There's plenty of time to file the application. If you've really done a good search for yourself and you found a good fit for yourself, that's, I think, really what will help you to narrow down your application list, right? Because you're going to apply to some places that might be a reach, where you may or may not be admitted, perhaps to the majority of places that you will be admitted, and maybe even some programs where that program might have less competition, right? That might be less rigorous for you. There's always ways to increase that rigor. So if that's the place you apply to because it is perhaps less expensive, right, in the overall scheme, there's still honors programs and dual majors and all those types of programs that can enhance that education that will make it, right, more competitive for you. So, you know, I think in terms of the application, don't rush to the application. Think about who you are, right, self-reflection as we mentioned again, and how you can benefit from that education, because I think that passion will show in the supplement. You'll be selling yourself to the institution, right? It's easy to do that when you find the best fits in the application search process. So don't rush to the application, but prepare yourself, I think, is more or less what I would recommend.
Thank you.
I guess I'll add to that, just because at Brookdale Community College, we do not have an essay requirement for admissions. However, we do have honors programs, and they do require essays. And what we look for is probably very similar to what you all look for in your admissions essays. And basically what I would say to you is this world is huge, and it's full of problems. And there are many opportunities for you to demonstrate an interest in what's happening in the world around you. For example, we have an honors group called Global Citizenship. And that really demonstrates that you're looking beyond yourselves and your communities, and you're having a global perspective, because we no longer live in silos, as we all know, because we're in the digital world, and everything that affects one affects the other. So when you're coming in, and if you want to distinguish yourself from others, then I would suggest that you show that you have a systematic way of looking at things, and you've demonstrated involvement prior to getting there, so that we know that this is a sincere effort. Usually evaluators can very easily ascertain which students are just, you know, stacking the deck, so to speak. And we're really looking for those who are truly inspired to make changes. So be authentic. Don't fake it, because that's easily seen. And if, think outside the box. As I said, there are many problems and there are many unique ways of solving it. It doesn't have to be the best way, but it could just be something that someone else hasn't thought of before, and it could be very simple. So capitalize on what makes you different.
I will say, though, that I think the question of, right, what are we looking for in an application, nothing replaces academic record, right? The academic rigor of your curriculum. You come from a very rigorous high school, the reputation, right, of that high school. So, for example, your own high school profile that, outlines for us what types of courses are offered, et cetera, your grading scale, obviously the grades that you receive in all of your academic coursework as you progress toward high school, right? Nothing replaces that. But I think then the difficulty becomes when everybody gets their results, right? Why is student A being admitted over student B? And that's all of the other factors, right, that we're considering in this process. So some of the, a lot of the recommendation from me is always dismiss the things that you have no control over and control the things that you can. Dismissing, right, has to include what we're looking for as the institution, because you have no control over that. So yes, you can look at our policies, you can look at our mission statements, you can look at who we are as a personality, as an institution, and right, what our goals are, but you in essence have no control over how we want to craft our class of only 550 students, right? That's something that we have control over. But you have control over where you apply, who you ask for a letter of recommendation, how you are true to yourself in self-reflection and write that in your supplemental essay, what type of leadership you take advantage of, and to what extent you take advantage of it. So those are all really important things in the process that you will be able to control, like demonstrated interest, right? Because demonstrated interest doesn't have to be financially a visit. We would prefer that for you, because stepping onto the campus, right, nothing replaces that. But it can start and end with a virtual visit before you're admitted, in fact. So those are all things that you can control. And then the things that you can't control, obviously, you have to dismiss, right? But ask questions. As you're moving through this process, I think it's really important that you get to know all of us, whoever that might be that might visit your high school and your community, because getting to know what the application process is like will help you to improve your own application process, right? So things like, what are you looking for in the application? What does your pool look like, right? Data. Maybe the pool looks very different if you're applying early decision in a binding way than regular decision in a general way. Maybe a certain major is more competitive than another. Maybe there's no way to move into that major once you're admitted, right? Many of us have programs like that where you're limited. That will help you to narrow down your choices, right? Especially for those students that might be interested in programs like health sciences and nursing. But nothing replaces your academic curriculum. It's to say that all of the other pieces of the puzzle, right, we want them to fit together. We want to be able to obviously match the puzzle, right, so that we're creating a picture of who you are as the applicant to help to advocate for you, right? We all work for an office of admission, not an office of denial, right? Our goal is to advocate for you. You have to give us, obviously, the tools to do that, but dismiss the things that you have no control over. So you're not going to be able to, I guess, in all essence, you're not going to be able to ever, I think, really sort of put pen to paper and realize why we made decisions while we're in a committee, right, talking amongst ourselves in terms of all of the applicants who apply from the high school. Having said that, we try to do our best, right, in terms of advocating for students. That doesn't mean that we have quotas. That doesn't mean if 5 students applied, to, I'll just use another example, to Bucknell from Holmdel High School. They're not here, so we'll pick on them. That all 5 students couldn't be admitted. But that's to see that all 5 students might not be what we're looking for or the right fit, right? Or generally speaking, most of our institutions, the students who apply are self-selecting our institutions and can probably do the work academically. But we're crafting communities. We're not just crafting, right, students who sit in a classroom, right? We're thinking about athletes, and we're thinking about, residents who live together, community, building community. So it's about that in the process. It's not only about the academic portion, right? So I know that from some particular high schools, right, it's hard to determine why student A got in over student B. And that's a difficult part of this process too, and something else that you have to dismiss, right? You have no control over.
That's great. You brought up so many, obviously, like pertinent points to what goes into an application. So I think maybe over the next few questions, we can kind of like go in and break those down a bit, right? Because that was a lot. We talked about demonstrated interest and, you know, the supplemental pieces and, you know, obviously the academic component of that, letters of recommendation. So I guess we'll start kind of on demonstrated interest. I know that it was mentioned that that's kind of how the student engages with the institution, right? And we mentioned like visitations, but what, just, you know, naming off some ways, what other ways can students demonstrate their interests in your institutions?
You heard a lot of great ones: visiting, virtual, reaching out for an interview, connecting with a member perhaps of our alumni network to interview with us. There's lots of ways to do that. The virtual world certainly opened up lots of different ways to interview. You don't always have to come to our campus. A lot of us visit high schools across the country and around the world, so showing up when we do that. A lot of us host receptions in hometown communities with alums and members of our staff and our leadership community. You could come to that. You could reach out to, it depends, as Danielle suggested, but you could reach out to our faculty, and that's a great way to really get to know us, to get to know our classroom. And certainly, you know, we're a D3 school. You've got some variety in size here today, but our coaches recruit heavily. If you want to play for us, you need to be in touch with our coach. You can't just show up. According to the NCAA rules, you can actually just show up, but you won't play, and so you've got to do that, and that's a great way. Yeah, right. So
I just showed up,
but you can't do that for most of our sports, and so that's a good way to demonstrate interest. So you can think about this great network of advocates that are beyond, right, the obvious ones too. You can stay overnight. You can do classroom visits. The one thing that the last thing I'll say is that you can certainly think about your engagement as a funnel, right? You start really general, you take a tour, perhaps you do an information session, but as you get to know and your list narrows, you can engage more deeply with a community because you have fewer places that you have to go or think about. And so that is when maybe you do introduce a visit to a class or a really rich conversation with a faculty member or a more intense or engaging conversation with one of the admissions staff members. And so as you kind of narrow your list, your engagement can increase because you have more bandwidth to do that as well too. So you don't have the opportunity, right, to do all of those things to perhaps the 20 schools that you have on your initial list, but you could perhaps to the 8 that make your final list as an example. And there's no right way to do it. That's maybe perhaps the last thing I'll say. There's no good way to game the system. A few years ago, the New York Times wrote an article, made their Sunday edition, about how nobody writes thank you cards anymore. Nobody follows up, nobody writes thank you cards. And so I probably was getting, 3 to 4 thank you cards every other week from students that I had interviewed or met somewhere. And that article came out on a Sunday. And I bet by that Wednesday, I had 150 thank you cards, right, in my inbox that were just students being like, we should thank you for meeting you 150 years ago. I'm like, there is no way to game the system. Someone has outsmarted you already, right? And so you should do this, as you heard from everybody, really genuinely, very intentionally, that as you move through the process in kind of this hopefully heartfelt way as well, too.
You mentioned a couple things that I kind of want to pull out of the mountain of excellence that you just presented, but one of the things, like GW does not track demonstrated interest, which means that when we open your file, we don't have the metrics of your engagement with us, the number of emails you sent us, the number of visits that you paid. So that's not a factor when we evaluate your application. However, I'll tell you what to do and what not to do, right? There are some applicants from New Jersey that I heard from no fewer than 20 times. And I would say to you that that has had no influence over my assessment of your application. One student wrote to me and said, I am absolutely fascinated with the way Slavic culture from the 19th century affected the development of communism in Estonia or whatever, right? And he said, but it's only taught at the graduate level. So I was like, okay. So I hooked him up with the professor who taught that at the graduate level. That professor wrote back to me and said, this kid is amazing. I want him on my research team. And he was a high school junior. That made a big difference in the way I evaluated his application. That's happened 2 times this year, where a student has written to a professor because they had a very specific interest, and that professor wrote to me and said, I want this kid on campus next year. That is a great way to demonstrate interest. But I will tell you that by peppering them with 20 emails is also not a good idea. If you have a very specific interest that's paralleled by someone on our faculty, what a wonderful thing to get a letter of reference from one of our current faculty members into the Office of Admissions. So don't pepper people with, new developments and, all of these things. We're happy for you, but it won't have any incremental influence over us. But talk to the people who are delivering the curriculum. Share with them your curiosity, because there's nothing more attractive in the admissions process than academic curiosity, in my point of view.
Thanks for telling my story, Chris, about how I emailed that professor and got into GW.
We were so happy.
Yeah, I know. It was a great research team. No, so TCNJ does track demonstrated interest. So whether you're coming for a virtual event or an on-campus presentation or meeting someone here at your high school, we do track that. What that doesn't mean, though, is when we do look at your application, we're not going to tally all these visits up and, all right, well, Brian interacted with us 18 times, so he gets 18 points. That's not what that is. What it can be is a student who might just be on the cusp of being admitted, and there's another student who is similar to that student in record. We might see that student A visited 3 times compared to student B who did not visit at all. So they might just get that little nudge over to be accepted than the student who didn't. And that doesn't mean you have to go to these events. If you're just doing a self-guided tour in the middle of July and we don't have a tour that day, we're open. Our offices are always open. So stop in, say hi, can I grab some information? I'm Brian, just wanted to let you know I visited. That counts for us as demonstrated interest. So definitely make yourself available. The other part is, somebody mentioned it about the essay. The amount of essays that I read on the transfer level of students going, oh, Brian, I'm really so excited. I've always wanted to go to TCNJ since I was little. This is my dream school. I can't wait to attend NJCU. What happened? What happened in there? No one proofread that? So just be mindful of what you're writing, have someone proofread it, or even just going back to connecting with hundreds and hundreds of students and parents daily. I remember phone numbers and I remember names for good and bad. And when the phone call comes through, it's like, ooh, do I want to pick this one up right now? Or, oh, I can't wait to talk to this family. For good or bad. And no joke, I've had students email me 30 times in one day. I had a student email me, hey, Brian, how's the weather where you're at? Same as you are, buddy. You're in New Brunswick. Same exact thing. So, like, there's a fine level of being involved in showing demonstrated interest and then going the extra, what's the word I want to say? Too far. Yeah, I was trying to think of the movie, Point of No Return. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so, but yeah, so keeping that level of like, I really want to go to this school, I'm really interested in insert Slavic culture or something like that. I've grown out of that phase of my life now, but keeping what you want to do and connecting with those people on our campus. And we've had a student who was pulled off the wait list last year because they've had interactions with our faculty. And they've reached out saying, wow, I heard from this student he wasn't accepted, what's happening with that? Or what's going on with that? This was a great student, we had a great interaction, and they were, kind of similar to your story. So it changes your perception of like, all right, they had a great interaction, they would do well in that classroom, maybe we missed something. So keeping those all those lines of communications open.
I would just say that you can ask, if this feels overwhelming, like who does this, why does it matter, when does it matter? You can ask, and then you can put that on your spreadsheet, right? Like, Dickinson cares and GW, it doesn't mean they don't care, just, Dickinson cares, GW is not tracking it, TCNJ tracks it this way, like all that stuff. So just ask, and you don't have to ask everybody at the beginning, but when you narrow that list, ask, then write it down, then do it.
Okay. I just want to jump over now to the testing and course components of the application. So I know there, has been a lot of talk about terminology, right? And one of the big ones now is test optional. So I was wondering if you could provide some information about what does that really mean, and how are students who submit test scores considered versus students who do not?
I'll start because I have a really nice, easy, direct answer. We do not require any. So we have become a test blind institution, which means that students are submitting to us only academic work in the classroom. So again, that's the high school profile and transcript, grading, rigor, et cetera, but no test score at all. So we actually are not looking at an SAT or an ACT in order to make an admission decision to the institution.
So TC&J is test optional for class of 2024. So if you're graduating next year, we're test optional. For anyone past that, we're going to review those again and see what that policy is and if it changes. Fingers crossed it doesn't change. So with that being said, it is entirely up to you if you want to submit test scores. ACTs, SATs, to us, it doesn't matter. We're not reviewing those for merit, scholarship, practicality, or admissibility. So what the test scores do, if you are submitting them, can help in one or two ways. One, if you're applying for education or becoming a teacher, it could help waive some of your praxis exams moving forward as you go further down that route. Or two, clear a placement test, math placement test or a writing placement test. It's really what those are for. However, there are programs that are at TC&J that need the test scores. So for example, an accelerated pre-med program, you would need to submit your test scores for that. That is a requirement. We need those. But if you're coming for communication or biology or computer science, entirely up to you if you want to place your test scores on that application or not. For me, I don't want anyone on the face of the earth to ever unearth my test scores, plus 10 years after I die. I didn't do very well on them. If you're that person, you're that student, and by the way, I took 5 SATs and 1 ACT in my whole entire high school career because my mom thought, the more you take, the better you do. Not true. You max out at 3. So keeping that in mind. But with that being said, I lost my train of thought. Submitting them. See, this is what happens. I talk about my mom and she just derails me. I'll come back to it. Somebody else could take over. But
I'll jump in. So the decision about submitting test scores is all about your homework, right? Once you have the list of schools to which you are applying, then your homework begins. Back in the day, back when everyone required them, you would just submit them and your homework was done. Now, if it's test blind, that's easy. If it's test requiring, that's easy. If it's test optional, which is going to be probably the largest group of your schools, your homework is to find out what the median 50% of the scores are for the admitted classes over the last 2 or 3 years, right? Because that's going to tell you if your score is an asset in that particular environment. And it's going to be different in every environment that you're looking at, right? So GW's, median is like 1370 to 1470, right? If your score is lower than that, keep it home. We're not putting your application in a different pile. We're simply valuing your other academic data points more. Now, the sort of asterisk to that, and Brian mentioned this a little bit, for some schools there are some selective programs or some merit scholarships that do require test scores. So that's another layer of your homework. So you're checking the median 50% of the admitted students' test scores, the ones who sent them, and you're checking to see if there's any merit scholarships offered at that school that require test scores. So really, that really is on you to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to make sure that you're sending it or not sending it to the right schools.
The number of test optional institutions in the United States, it took about 60 years to get to about 1,200 test optional institutions in the U.S. Bates and Bowdoin were the first 2 colleges in the U.S. to do it. It took about 60 years from when they did it till the pandemic to get to about 1,200. That 1,200 number doubled in about 6 months to 2,400 institutions in the United States that are test optional. Took 60 years to get to 1,200, took 6 months to add 1,200 to that list. It was, so when you hear about this really systemic shift in testing nationally, it was explosive and really seismic. It really changed the face of how higher education understood testing in a very short period of time. And what you heard from a couple of us is that we're still trying to understand it. Like we're in the middle of a pilot, perhaps, so we're sussing out what the long-term impact of these decisions might look like, because it was really fast, and we're trying to really fully flesh it out. What Chris said is a huge takeaway. Look at that middle 50%. Colleges are super self-interested. Right? She said it in a really polite way, you should make a choice that makes sense for you, but colleges are telling you this is our middle 50%. If you submit a score lower than that, you have to think about it long and hard. Why would you do that? How could that advocate for you? 3 years from now, everyone's going to have a 1600. And because every single college is self-selecting out all of those scores, every year now, as a result, scores go up by an average of 10 to 15 points because they are self-selecting out these scores, right? There is a natural end to this. It's a really important part of the conversation, too.
So, Brookdale is slightly different. Brookdale Community College meets you where you're at. So, we were never test optional. What we do is we have assessments. And these assessments are neither pass or fail. They literally meet you where you are, because we tend to value the entire student and your abilities as you bring them to us. So we're really testing in or assessing in 2 areas, and that's in reading and in math. And that's because we're trying to be sure that you're at least able to handle a college level reading and math type of reasoning, because we are looking for you to succeed and not to fail. So the assessments that are given literally will place you at whatever level you are. If you are deemed foundational studies, then we will put you in foundational studies, bring you up to par. If you are college level ready, you start on a college level ready level and you take off from there. But the idea is not to have that student fail and then literally depart from the academic experience, because we know we are all different learners, we all learn differently, and we're really trying to hone in on every kind of student. Everybody has value. It's just a matter of knowing how to assess that value. And so those assessments are just that, assessments, not tests. So it takes away that anxiety and that angst that you feel when you have to test and make a certain particular standard. We can actually meet you where you are, and we encourage all students to apply. Everybody who applies gets in because of that particular type of assessment that we do, and we are hopeful that that is actually going to give us a longer retention with the students, because it's one thing to get in. You can get into a really rigorous college with a very high score, and you'll find quickly that it's not the same as high school. And that very, really smart student in high school is going to start struggling quite quickly. So we're really looking to get an overall view of where you are so that we can place you where you'll be most successful.
Great, so that was, really informative about testing and that information. I know that academic profile was mentioned as well, so I was wondering if you could touch upon how, course selection and the rigor of those courses, as well as grades received, are considered in the application. Like, for example, if a student takes a push and gets a B, like how does that maybe compare to a student that takes U.S. history and gets an A?
This is a question that we all go, because every time there's a Q&A, someone asks that question. How should I hedge my bets on this? So let's just draw a larger picture. I think that the transcript tells the same kind of story that an essay does. It tells the story of a scholar who's evolving and growing, and their neurons are growing and changing, and they're figuring out what they're good at and what they're not good at. And so I like to actually not just look at the GPA or not just scan for C's. I like to look at the first year and say, okay, this student, maybe they have to really, really work hard on a placement test to get in an honors class in their first year. So maybe they're a none, that's okay. In second year, look at that. They tested the water in math because they're good in math, and they took an honors course. Let's see, is this student going to try something harder in junior year in math? oh wow, they took this, you know, they tried AP psychology. This is an adventurous learner. They're sort of, so I like to read an application and sort of understand the tale of the development of that learner. So that's, again, like sort of a non-answer. But I like to tell that story because I want to pull people away from that sort of gaming my transcript. Like, should I not take A-push because I'm not sure I can get an A? Well, I'm not necessarily just looking for that A. I'm looking for whether you had sort of, whether you're developing a love affair with history. So that even if you got a B in A-push instead of maybe, you know, an A in all the preceding classes, you were adventurous enough, you had a curiosity level that made you want to take a bigger bite. Another thing that I look for is a student who maybe took an AP course in their sophomore year and it didn't go so well, and so they went back to an honors level in junior year and they killed it. I was like, this is a student who's developing self-knowledge, right? So it's sort of a big, writ large answer to your question, but I spend a lot of time with the transcript. As Danielle said, it's the most important piece, and I read a story instead of scanning it for liabilities, right? So that's sort of my approach as a reader.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think we forget about appropriate and just think about perhaps rigor and again, the sort of the most, right, in this process rather than perhaps the story and the progress. And appropriateness is so important in this game, if we want to call it that, because we are thinking about, right, the progress of the student from year to year, from subject to subject. I always tell students, right, if you're, for example, choosing a major rather than being undecided to the institution, you're choosing a lean, and I'm leaning with you, right? So that could be another way in which we see the trajectory of your education, right, and sort of the brain, right, of a young person. So if you're the student who might lean in the humanities versus the sciences versus the languages, we're seeing that appropriateness in different ways in terms of the academic subject, the academic rigor, and the grades that you're getting right across the board. And so appropriateness is really important. One of the things that I really have a huge problem with is when students and families sort of argue the case with their administration that they should be placed into a course that their faculty member doesn't, recommend for them. And there could be at certain times when a student really can handle that workload, but I think your faculty know you best, and if they're making a recommendation for you, and it could be one versus the other, right? It's not necessarily, no, we don't think you should move from honors to AP. It could be, right, the reverse of that. But really build relationships with your faculty in the courses that you're obviously, the courses that you're taking, because their assessment is really important in this process. And I think that ties really closely to appropriateness. We're not counting, right, on your transcript how many APs you took and how many A's you got, et cetera. That doesn't equal a win and an admission decision that's positive, right? That's not how the process works. It's not black and white, it's all gray. Right? So I think appropriateness is really important, taking a look at where you strive versus where you thrive, where you're going to do best, where you're going to learn and enjoy, right? Those are all things that will play into taking rigorous curriculum. Yes, is the answer, should I take a college prep course and get an A, or an honors or an AP course and get a B? The answer is always, you should take the AP course and get an A, right? I mean, let's face it, but that's not always going to happen in this process. And so, again, the goal, right, the movement to that process, the movement to that decision is just as important as the decision itself. So please use your faculty and your counselors to make those decisions that are appropriate for you. And I think the rest usually, lends itself to working out well. Those are really the classes I think students enjoy the most, do well in, have passion for. It could be that you take certain honors and AP courses in certain, again, disciplines and not in others. But we see that as we read application, right? You're the student that is not the language student or not the math student, right? But that's consistent over the 4 years, that you've spent in high school.
All right, thank you. And we have about 10 minutes until we're going to open questions for the audience, but I did want to ask you all, what are your suggestions for students seeking letters of recommendation? You know, we were talking about how important it is for the faculty relationship with the student, right? So any advice you could offer to the audience?
I mean, you should try to be nice to at least one junior teacher. You know, you can narrow your scope. It doesn't have to be all of them. It just has to be one. And so if that feels like all of your energy, go for it. My wife is an 11th grade English teacher for juniors. Last year she wrote 17 letters of recommendation. My sister is a high school principal. I have 2 siblings that are guidance counselors. And so we live in this world a lot. This is a big decision. And sometimes it's an overlooked decision. Not every single school, right, requires letters of recommendation. I totally get that. But when they do, I don't want to read more than I have to because we're reading at a really fast clip, reviewing applications. And so if we're requiring it, it's because we want it. And I turn to the letter of recommendation to understand students' intellectual vitality in the classroom. What do they sound like? It doesn't mean that you have to be the student that raises your hand and sits in the front every single moment. It doesn't mean that you have to be the person that sits all the way in the back and absorbs and delivers like the most intellectual treatise, you know, in the class. It's not that, right? I want to see from a faculty member's perspective, what do you sound like in an academic setting? What does that look like? And sometimes it's just a snapshot. So you might choose a faculty member where you really soared. It might be a faculty member where you really struggled. You know, physics was really hard, but you persevered, you did well, right? There's lots of different narratives for why you might choose letters. If you have to choose 2 letters, perhaps choose 2 different narratives, right? Have faculty that might say something different. Because my wife writes a lot of letters of recommendation, we have 3 kids under the age of 7. We like to see them occasionally. She requires that all of those students that ask her for an interview, they ask her for a letter of recommendation, they have to do a 45-minute interview with her. They have to talk to her. You have to bring in a resume. Sounds terrible. That's probably why people, you know, she doesn't get 40 requests. But it does narrow the field, and the student that sits in front of her comes in and says, I think my letter, the thing you are going to write for me, could fit into my application in this way, right? This person's probably going to write about this. I'm going to write about this on my essay. My resume is going to say this. Don't talk about my resume, right? My transcript's going to say this. Your letter could say this, and it could fit in this way in my application. And so fitting that puzzle piece together and helping the teacher see that or your faculty members see that is a really big gift. You don't have to write all this other stuff. Don't write about my activities. Don't write about my other classes. Write about this thing that I think we did well together, and it'll really add a dimension to the application that isn't there. That's my recommendation for letters.
And to add to that, if a teacher or a counselor is asking you to do a task to help them get to know you better, don't phone that in. If they say, we have a 3-page inventory we'd like you to fill out, do it, and do it thoughtfully. Don't do it as another item that you'd want to check off your list. Because we see what it looks like when you phone it in to your counselor and when you spend time with that counselor. The difference in the quality of the letter, the difference in the nuance that it puts on your resume is far and away, right? If they know the relationships with your siblings, if they know that you, as getting to know yourself as a learner, pivoted in this way, if they understand your motivations, if they understand your challenges and your personal victories, I'll tell you what, that counselor letter could be one of the most important essay or non-transcript item in that application. When someone asks you to do something that helps them get to know you better, put all of your attention to making that a good thing.
You know, my wife likes students, but she doesn't like them that much, right? So she's not like, I would love to spend an extra 45 minutes with them. And so she's 100% what Chris just said. She's writing your letter in that conversation, right? So you're telling her what happened. She's writing it down, and it's going directly into the letter, right? So that's the way, that kind of engagement, because your counselors are busy. They're fantastic, but they're busy, right? And so give them fertile ground to write with, too.
I'll also just tag off of that. It doesn't also have to be a teacher in the program that you're looking to apply to. So, for example, if you're coming for computer science or engineering, it doesn't have to necessarily be a physics or a math teacher. You know, I went to school for communications. I didn't ask my TV production teacher for a letter of rec. I asked my chemistry teacher, and I had chemistry, and I didn't do well in chemistry, and the reason I asked them to write the letter is because I had a good relationship with that teacher, and I tried hard, and I worked my tail off in that class, and I just wasn't a student of the sciences. But I had them write that letter for me because they could explain what I do in the classroom, even though I'm not doing well in this class, what I do and what I bring to that class day in and day out. And I'm not saying that's the reason I got admitted to the school, but it is. But also the way I review applications, I read a student essay first, then the letters of rec, and then I go back to the transcripts. And we could all sit up here and read all of our applications completely different, but that way I get an idea of who you are as a person, what you're like inside the classroom, what you were like growing through the entire high school curriculum from your school counselor letter of rec, and then translating that to what you did in the classroom and your grades you earned. So that's how I review my applications that I review. Those letters of rec are powerful. And moms and dads, we know you love your kids, but we're good. I will say this, though, in the 10 years, I've never had a letter of rec from a parent saying, don't admit my kid, so offer is out there. I think that would be fun. But in all honesty, we're good.
I would just say too, right, this is another control factor, right? Who you ask for the letter, how you prepare for the letter, when you ask for the letter, early, right? What information you provide to them, the direction that you give them, right? These are all things that you have control over in your process. So choose wisely. I would also say don't inundate your reader, as Greg mentioned, with letters. Follow the directions. If the application process requires a counselor letter, please build a relationship with your counselor. It's a 50-50 relationship. This is a human process. And your faculty member, and you would like to submit an additional letter for whatever reason, maybe you feel that that third letter would add to the application and not repeat the same information and regurgitate, please ask, follow directions, right? So that could be a coach, maybe a moderator of a club or activity that you belong to, a manager at a part-time job, et cetera. Please ask before you submit, because we would not want you to put the time and energy and effort in, including the letter writer, and then not be able to obviously add it to your application. So please, again, follow the directions. But I think in terms of letters, they're a nice sort of round right way to connect the dots in your application. And again, we don't want Kylie to regurgitate information, right? We want to be able to connect the dots. So we want to hear something different in the letter from your counselor to your teacher, to your essay, to your writing sample, to your supplement that we see, and in no other part of your application, right? This is building dimension, right? So that we have more information and more ammunition, right, to admit you. So don't regurgitate the same information.
All right. I'll just add really quickly to that. Ask someone who knows how to write about you. As a special favor. Because believe it or not, writing is not everybody's forte. And even if they have something interesting to say about you, if they're not saying it in a productive, constructive way, it can get lost in that essay. That's all I'm going to say.
All right, thank you all so much. I mean, that was a lot of information, and I'm sure there's still a lot of questions floating around, and if we wanted to get started with the audience questions.
So I'm a little bit confused because the advice seems to be all over the place in terms of, for a student to show specific concentration, interest in one area, and just continue to pursue, higher level courses in that area versus a lot of advice is like, oh, no, you have to show that you're a well-rounded individual, show that you're interested in more than just one thing. So which is it?
So I think so the question is, right, should the student, it depends. And the question is really, is the student thinking about being a well-rounded student versus what I call an angular student, right? Some students that apply, especially I think I'm stereotyping, but students who apply to certain particular programs, BAMD programs, nursing programs, engineering, et cetera, might be more angular, right? They might obviously focus all of their attention in the math and science area because that's their strongest suit. I think most students are undecided, right? Whether they choose a major or not, they're undecided. They've been exposed to English, history, right, the social sciences, math, languages, et cetera. They come to SDSU with 202 options. So if you're not quite sure about a major or you really are not sure what your lean is, And here, at a very competitive high school, right, you're taking 4 years generally of every academic subject. So you're already a well-rounded student, right? You're taking generally 4 years of those subjects: English, history, math, science, languages. If you're not taking a 4th year of an academic subject, that doesn't mean you're not well-rounded, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're angular, right, either. But you might have a passion or a growing passion in a certain particular area that you want to focus on. We don't give you a lot of opportunity, unfortunately, to do that in high school, right? There's graduation requirements, and you need to fit them all in. And then there's very few electives. So what I would say in terms of, moving toward your last year of high school is, if you do have some choice, you should think about, perhaps, if you are the student who's leaning in a certain academic direction, and you've always leaned in that academic direction, that might be where you put your eggs, right? Because when we're looking at your application, we can say, oh, Mary didn't take a 4th year of history, but she took 2 math courses in senior year because she's applying to our computer science program, right, or a dual degree in X, Y, or Z. So I think that makes sense to us when we're reviewing the information in the application.
And I would just add a word of caution about electives. Like, if you're leaning toward like an engineering program or something like that, and you want to sacrifice, say, French 5 for another science-based course, don't choose sort of fun adventures in engineering, right? Choose a different physics, or choose like an AP chemistry or something like that. We want to see the most academic coursework that you are able to choose in those areas that are helping you play to your strengths, right? So don't go soft in senior year, especially if you're, trending toward a particular area. Choose an academic course rather than sort of a lighter touch, more professionally driven elective, because that's going to pay off better in your selection.
And just to add, I think you could ask that question to every school in the country, and we will give you a completely different answer. And I think you could be very focused in your academic studies and also be well-rounded at the same time. It doesn't have to stay within the realm of academics. You could be well-rounded in your extracurricular activities. You could, do charity work. You could do community service. You could have a part-time job. You could take care of your brothers and sisters or your grandmother and be, the president of the student government. All of that stuff is well-rounded too. So it really kind of, asking that question. And I joked around, like, it depends. It depends on which school you're asking for those questions too, because all of us have different answers for that. And that's part of that application process. And I think the other thing for everybody to understand is things change from year over year. What our goals were for this year are going to be different for next year. And what programs we're trying to fill this year might be completely different next year. And those are things that you cannot control. We control those. So kind of trying to, and in the world we live in where everything is just conveniently tossed out on social media in terms of, I was admitted to this school and I got this scholarship package, I think taking those things with a grain of salt is definitely worth a note too, because it might change next year. So a neighbor, a friend, a cousin who might have got admitted to insert school, and I'm interested in going to that school, and I have similar grades or slightly better grades, I should be admitted and I should get a better admissions packet for financial aid. Might not always be the same thing. So focus, we've said it multiple times here tonight, but focus on the things you can control. Your grades, your extracurricular activities, your application, getting it in by the deadline, working with your school counselors, working with teachers, kind of getting those things that you can control in line, and let us worry and stress out about the small details. This process, I really feel, can be very stress-free at times. It has completely ballooned into the most stressful experience you will ever experience in your entire life. And when I went to school, it was stressful in the fact because my parents had no idea what they were doing. I had to find that all out by myself. But it also is completely different for you now because I had to mail out all my transcripts and stuff. Completely different, and things take some time still, but at the same point, everything is broadcast over social media now. So like, just be very careful and cognizant of trying to compare yourself to the Joneses, because the Joneses might have a very different background and academic style that, like, it might be completely different. So keeping those thoughts in mind, but students can be academically well-rounded, socially well-rounded, and still meet all of those criteria as well too. So
I think one of the things that we forget is that your job as the student, right, the family who's focused on this process is also your responsibility. It's not, your school counselor is wonderful, and your school counselor will help and guide you, but their sole job is not to get you into college. That is a false statement. So let's clear the air there, right? That's one of their jobs, is to guide you and help you. It has to be, again, a relationship, right? It has to be a family focus. And I say that because there are many, many colleges out there that will never visit, that will never, build a relationship perhaps with the high school, and your counselor can't do it all. They really can't. So your job as the family, right, is to, once you think about your application leads, and once you're thinking about the lien in your application and where you might apply, doing your homework is so important. And I think families forget that in this process, we all have different requirements. That's hard, right? It's this Excel spreadsheet to the nth degree. But I would say that for my previous institution, a very different, perhaps, admission process than my current, right? We're very transparent about our process because it's not as holistic, right? So holistic can bring with it a wealth, in itself. But when you're working for an institution that's very direct, then those policies and procedures are also very transparent and in black and white, right? So it might be easier for you to examine and to follow, et cetera, but the outcome, again, is very different. So please go onto our websites directly. Don't use a third party, right? Not Naviance, not a book, not your neighbor who applied and was admitted last year. But our resources are our websites, right, to guide you to understand what our requirements are. And they're laid out for you year after year, but they might change from year to year, just like our application deadlines. This year, our financial aid deadline, right, will change for FAFSA, that universal financial aid form. So these things are constantly changing. It has to be, again, your responsibility as a family to keep up with the changes, right? Not only your counseling office, because this is an overwhelming process. And there's many, many schools out there. So you have to work together, which is why I say, students, go to your counseling office, get to know your counselor, be at their door, right? I have built a relationship with Holmdel because obviously Joe is nice enough to see me every year, and Dolores is great to give me an appointment and to come here and, to spend time for all the schools that I've worked for, right? So it's building that relationship that will help you ask questions, to be comfortable to ask questions so that you get the right answers, so that you're doing the right things in this process. So again, it's a human process. So be sure that you're really doing your homework.
Next question over here.
Thinking about it from an acceptance perspective, a scholarship, and a financial aid perspective, what are your thoughts on the pros and cons of early admission, early acceptance versus regular application?
This is a good question about, perhaps part of the question is, we want to be able to consider all of our financial options, merit scholarships, need-based aid, and if we were perhaps considering an early process, like early decision, which is binding, it would preclude us from seeing all of the other aid packages. And that's true, right? That if you apply early decision to one school, because you can only apply early decision to one school, and you are admitted, you're expected to enroll. Doesn't mean that you can't apply to other schools at the same time. It just means that once you're admitted to that school, you must withdraw all of your other applications. And really, you should. You should have several other applications out there, because the likelihood that you're admitted to your first choice might be very good, but it might not work out, as you heard, right? Because it depends. The one thing that I'd say maybe look out for is certainly you should ask questions, you should be in touch, you should really develop a strong relationship with that school that you're thinking perhaps about early decision with, and ask a bunch of questions. At a place like Dickinson, we offer early merit pre-reads and early need-based pre-reads for early decision families. I just had a student ask me the other day, do you do it for regular decision families? No, we don't. Because why would we, right? You're going to get all the other packages. You're going to be able to compare. But for that family that's thinking about one school, and perhaps it's Dickinson, it could be anybody, but perhaps it's Dickinson, at least us, we're going to try to give you your merit and your need-based aid before you hit submit on that early decision. Before you sign, the parent or guardian, the student signs, and a college counselor or a guidance counselor signs that letter and says, if I'm admitted, I will enroll, right? So we want to give you your financial aid package up front before you hit that submit button. That's not universally true, but without that, right, you don't have that assurance of what my financial aid package will look like. The last thing I'll say really quickly is that you can do something called the net price calculator. All schools are federally mandated to have something called the net price calculator on their website. It's supposed to be obvious. It is as good as the information as you put in, right? So if you make $200,000 a year and you put an extra zero in and all of a sudden you make $2 million, that's pretty different, right? And so we see that all the time. It's actually a relatively easy mistake to make. And so we try to really work and counsel with families to get that information as accurate as possible so that it will spit out a need-based, in some cases merit-based, impression of what your package might look like. So every single school has something called the net price calculator on their website that you can avail yourself of at any point in the process too.
You know, I think having worked for institutions that are leaning toward the most expensive in the country and then in the middle of the road and then, right, the less expensive schools, doing your homework again in this instance is really important, right? Filing the right form. If there's additional forms to file, making sure you meet deadlines. They're not guidelines, right? They're deadlines. So if you miss the deadline, you might miss the opportunity. Making sure you ask questions about what type of aid is offered, right? Need-based financial aid is a loan, work study to work on the campus, right, and be paid for that duty, and then obviously a grant, an institutional money. If we have offered you a loan and only a loan, we have offered you a financial aid package, right? So when you think about those terms, right, you have to just think about what they mean, right? The bottom line cost, direct cost, right? Direct cost is your tuition and the fees and your housing and the meal plan, direct fees, right? I always suggest to students, understand what those direct fees cost, right? How many units of credit, for example, because if it's covering 12 credits, which is full-time, and you're only taking 12 credits and paying for 12 credits, you will not graduate in 4 years, right? Most of our institutions, you'll need to do a 5th year, right? So what does that cover? And then obviously make sure you're comparing apple to apple when you get your financial aid package, right? Institutions obviously are different distances away. I always tell students, especially if you're attending an institution where you're traveling, what do the travel costs look like per year, right? Getting back and forth. That has to be part of your financial discussion as a family. It might not be direct cost, right? And then things like, what can I receive from the institution above and beyond need, right? Above and beyond need would be obviously anything that's offered to you based on talent, based on academic prowess, based on a participation, right? They might be art portfolios and organizations and your leadership that you provide us in the application. It might be a talent-based scholarship. It might be athletics, for example. That's all additional money, but might not be linked to the need-based portion, right? The FAFSA form, for example, or a CSS profile form, which are need-based forms. So you have to ask those questions. Keep in mind that less expensive institutions, I'll use mine in particular, might not be as generous, right, as more costly institutions. Private institutions are costly. Their bottom line price their sticker price might look large, but generally speaking, they might have very large endowments to offer you money to offset the cost because they have to enroll a class, and that's what they do, right, in terms of the financial aid package. So these are things that you have to ask about. Early decision is a great option, but it's an ethical agreement, right, that you enter into when you're obviously signing your agreement. You, the reputation of your high school, because your counselor signs the agreement, right, and your family. So you need to think about those conversations early. I would encourage you as a family to think about those conversations early and have them. We know this might be the first time that you have financial conversation, right, with your son or daughter, but it's really important to do that. We don't want disappointed students in the end. But know that the bottom line cost is not always the bottom line, right? But do compare, do use the net price calculator, do your homework, file forms on time, make sure you're following directions, meeting guidelines. Those things will all help you, right, in the process as you progress.
Yeah, you stole my point there at the end. I think it's a very important process, especially for parents, to have that open dialogue about the financial cost of an institution with your son or daughter. You want them to include you in as much of the process that you want to be included in. And that might be, what schools are you looking for? Have you applied or whatnot? But you have to also include yourself in the process, and that might be the financial aid component. How much can we as a family afford to send you to? I always kind of, TCNJ is an early decision school. You would get your merit scholarship packet information if you are admitted. Keep in mind, 30% of our admitted student population is awarded a financial or awarded a merit scholarship. On average, that's $2,000. Our tuition for in-state is around $17,000 for the year. So if that's something that is going to sound good to you in terms of, yeah, that's affordable for us, or is $2,000 not enough and that doesn't close that gap, then that early decision might change. And I always consider it having this conversation of 4 buckets. One, first bucket being I, the student, am paying for everything. Out of pocket, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna get jobs, I'm gonna take out loans, etc. Bucket 2, me, mom and dad, legal guardian are gonna help figure out how to pay for school. We're gonna figure it out together. Might be a cosign loan, might be a New Jersey class loan, what have you. We're gonna figure it out. 2, grandma and grandpa left a lot of money for me, and I know the Waltons, and they're gonna donate a lot of money in my name to go to school, and I don't have to pay anything. I wish I could have that bucket. And bucket 4, I have no idea what bucket I'm in. I don't even know where to buy a bucket. Where can I get them? And having that conversation now will set you up for success moving forward, because I'm sure year over year, Greg, we have phone calls from parents who are admitted early decision students going, I have to tell my son or daughter that they can't come here because I can't afford it. How do I have that conversation? I don't know. But having that weird, awkward conversation tonight, over the weekend, over the summer, over pizza, having it all laid out in front and having everybody on the same team will set you up for success moving forward for events, coming to sessions, asking us questions, doing the net price calculator. All of that information will be great. And then the final part, when you're doing all of that, keeping in mind that at this point in the process, don't bug out at the financial cost of an institution. That can change. Keeping that in mind, don't write a school off if they're super expensive, and don't write a school off if they're super not expensive either. Finding the financial fit for you is just as important as finding the academic, socially, and emotional fit as well too, but you have to start that conversation and get all that information from you as a family and from us as a school as well. So all of that ties in together. So
I would just add something, and I say this and it's a very unpopular thing to say, but large institutions don't have the luxury of doing what Dickinson does to do a merit and a need-based pre-read for early admission students. When you're doing budgeting for higher ed, please look at your merit scholarship as icing. Don't budget your college costs based on your supposition that your very awesome child, and we agree they're awesome, is going to get a $30,000 merit scholarship. That sets everybody up for disappointment, right? When you're doing budgeting, use the net price calculator, talk about how willing you are to take out loans, and have that conversation with your child, because it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking when we have students not only who can't afford to come, but can't afford to stay after a year, right? You're not just talking about affording college for 1 year, you're talking about affording college for 4 years. So please, when you're having those budget discussions, think about merit scholarships as icing and not as a guaranteed drop in your bucket, because that only sets you up for heartbreak.
And I think too, right, to compound that is if the net price calculator tells you that your contribution is higher than the cost of every institution in this country, and you're not getting a need-based financial aid package, then you should assume responsibility for paying the bill for that institution if you're applying early decision, right? Because again, there's no guarantee for other types of money.
All right, so that will conclude our panel tonight. There was a wealth of information shared, so I hope you all benefited from this. Thank you to our panelists for being here and providing all this information. And thank you all for coming out tonight. If you want, on the way out, there is some takeaway information from the institutions present tonight at the back table. And everyone have a great night. Thank you.